Hello, everyone. I'm so delighted to be joined by Julia Bernstein, the Chief Operating Officer of Tempest. I'm so excited to have her discuss the 3 C's of behavioral health startups. So without further ado, I'm going to let Julia take over.
Great. Thanks, Salome. I'm delighted to be here and have an opportunity to speak with all of you today. As Salome mentioned, I'm the COO of Tempest, which is the leading modern recovery platform that offers online support for those who are looking to change their relationship with alcohol and other substances. Prior to being at Tempest, I've been working in the behavioral health space for a while. First at Ginger.io, and then on the payer side at Beacon Health Options, in addition to advising a number of startups in this space. And, I think for those of us who've been doing this for a while, which, means 5 or 10 years right now, we've kind of been through what I would think about as the cycle of buzzwords. So when I first started in this space, it was quantified self and passive data and big data, and then it moved to remote monitoring and chronic case management, and then it was machine learning and artificial intelligence, and now we seem to be in a bit of a cycle with digital therapeutics and coaching and mindfulness. But I think what's been interesting is, despite all of the changing buzzwords, when we look at it, there are really only 3 business models for behavioral health startups in our space. There's B2B, so going directly to enterprise. There's B2C, or direct to consumer, going directly to the consumer. And then there's, I think where increasingly all of these companies start to converge, which is B2B2C, which is third-party reimbursement for services that are offered to consumers. And I think, as I look back at my experience over the last 8 years and think about the work we've done at Tempest, I think it's become increasingly clear that whether you're B2B, B2B2C, or D2C, at the end of the day, if you're serving patients, you are a consumer-first company, and the skills and muscles that you need to develop for both awareness as well as for intervention delivery are those that are more and more similar with a consumer lens on healthcare. And I think, put differently, we've been talking for years about how healthcare consumers aren't consumers in the traditional sense, and I think a lot of that has changed. And I think one of the reasons that has changed is there's been an increasing awareness that organizations need to do all of what I call the 3 C's, content, community, and care, to drive awareness, intervention, and retention for the digital delivery of behavioral health solutions. I Googled content, community, and care when I was preparing this presentation, and the first place I saw it was in our Tempest Series A press release, but it's not a new idea. I think what's new is the way in which these 3 elements are being woven together to meet people where they are and offer support. And so by content, what I mean is content that builds awareness not only of a problem, but also of a solution. By community, I mean the importance of a shared experience, whether online or offline, that drives adherence and retention. I think one of the things that's been really interesting is the extent to which people are looking to associate with others and feel safe when they're sharing how they're feeling. And then I think with that, making sure that any community must be defined and moderated so that people continue to engage in it. And then care, it's the recognition that one-on-one support is necessary. And I think it's been, the interesting change has been the move from the medical and the counseling to the development of coaching, whether text-based or video-based, as well as peer support. So some of these new models of care. Tempest, from the beginning, has been an organization where content, community, and care are woven together in our approach to helping people change their relationship with alcohol. We actually started as a content company and quickly added both online facilitated community, local and online, as well as live events as a way of driving awareness. And that's kind of morphed into a strategy that brings together social, that brings together live events, and that brings together content. To help people just become aware of even the issue of alcohol. And then from a product standpoint, we've got a tiered membership model where some of the lower tiers that are focused on meeting people where they are almost primarily driven by psychosocial educational content, video and written, community, both in the form of live support groups, as well as a facilitated 24/7 community, and then adding that one-on-one care in our peer-led product and then in our clinician-led product, for both teletherapy and med management. And so I think for us, it's really been a question of how do you use content, community, and care to reinforce changing behavior and reinforce evidence-based and evidence-informed practices that help people address mental health and substance use needs. We're not the only company that's using this content, community, and care model. These are a number of examples that, just a quick search at other companies in the space brought up. I think, and one good example is NoCD, which I think has done a really nice job in creating an app-based delivery where the content, community, and care are really woven together. You can see even in their design, they've got the therapist, they've got the content exercises, and then they have the community as the entry point. Ginger, where I was a very early employee and has really evolved into a very care-focused virtual clinic, has really been adding a lot of content. They've made all of their content free as a response to COVID. They've also really started embracing the need to be a consumer-first company and use content from a social media perspective. Big White Wall, which is one of the first peer-led communities, if you look at what they're offering, they've got the trained practitioners, they've got the creative tools and self-guided resources, and then a little bit beyond the behavioral health space, but very much in the behavior change and digital health and wellness, sort of one of the original community-based interventions in Weight Watchers actually has moved to that tiered model of having the community only, the community plus content, and then the community content, and then that one-on-one care. And so I think, whether companies talk about themselves as embracing the 3 Cs or not, you're increasingly seeing, the use of these tools as digital health finally kind of becomes consumer healthcare and consumer first when it comes to attracting and retaining members. So how should organizations think about building or contracting with, for the payers and employers in the audience, 3C models? So the first thing I would say is really define your audience and how are you going to engage with them? What are you going to do differently to raise awareness of what you're doing, to raise awareness of the problem you're tackling, and to make your space safe as opposed to some of the other options that might exist? The second thing is to develop clear guidelines for your content and community and care. What does brand consistency look like for you across all 3? How do you make sure that you're creating a sense of your content, community, and care being linked by shared principles, shared evidence-informed practices, shared approaches? And I think that also leads into how do you programatize your method? How do you make sure these elements fit into an intervention? And how do you ensure consistency, especially when you're using a mix of technology and services to deliver the different interventions? From a business model perspective, going back to where we started, having your plan for payment. If you're a B2C company, what product are people buying? How do you package content, community, and care into purchasable interventions? And if you're going B2B or B2C, how can you fit your services within an existing payment structure? Can you use a virtual clinic model and attach yourself to a billable code or a bundle? If you're going an EAP or wellness route, how do you contract as a vendor again for an understandable service across an employee population? And then the final piece is really measuring what matters. Not only clinical outcomes, but I think especially when you're talking about content and community, which can feel a little bit more intangible than that one-on-one care piece. How do you think about measuring engagement and impact? What is adherence for an intervention that is multimodal? And then how do you translate that to ROI as you think about telling a story about the impact of what you've built, both to consumers, but also to third-party payers? So, I think I'm really excited about the 3Cs. I think it's been really impactful at Tempest. It's been one of the ways in which we've been able to attract. It's one of the ways in which we've been able to attract customers. It's also one of the ways in which we've been able to drive the efficacy that we've seen. And I'm excited to see other companies embrace it, especially as it means a movement towards viewing consumers in healthcare as consumers who are able to make informed choices and decisions around what they need to get better. Salome, you're on mute.
I guess that would help. Thanks so much, Julia. That was fabulous. It's clear that given the fact that you're such a trusted advisor to so many behavioral health companies, I know that to be true, and that was definitely evidence of your presentation here. So would love to ask you a couple questions.
Sure.
So super interesting, but I gotta ask, is all of this really actually something new? Or is it just more about repackaging things that we've been doing for a while now, given changing consumer tastes and whatnot?
I think the answer is a bit of both. I think what's been really interesting is you've seen a move away from solutions that were only doing one of these things to a recognition that you need to offer multiple elements of content and community and care. In the same way that when we talk about, moving from episodic interventions, the 4-week rehab, the 8-week IOP, to actually sort of a long-term maintenance plan. I think one of the things that we've actually seen at Tempest, which is really interesting, is, we've got folks who stay on our platform for years. Early in their recovery, it's the content that really gets them, it's the care that keeps them there, and then it's the community that becomes really important for maintenance. So it's thinking about bringing them all together so that we can create, from a business perspective, what we would call LTV, but from a healthcare perspective, continued engagement to support people in their recovery and health.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, you'd mentioned community and a couple other startups in there that have done a great job of it. We're having Stephen Smith from NoCD speaking later, same thing. Russ Cook from Ginger also speaking. But yeah, the community piece is really powerful. But how do you create a lasting community, especially given privacy concerns?
Yeah, I was on a call the other day and we were talking about the trade-off between privacy and safety. And, I think in the mental health space, privacy is safety. We've spent a lot of time at Tempest thinking about how we build our community norms, for instance, pseudonyms versus how do we ask people to identify. We have a lot of folks in the community who are actually in professions like healthcare or teaching or, caregiving professions where identifying as having a drinking problem can have career repercussions. So how do we do that? So being really thoughtful from a data and a norm perspective, being really thoughtful from a community guidelines and agreement perspective. So we used to call them guidelines, now they're agreements that we ask everyone who comes through the program to adhere to. And we've got a trained peer coaching moderation team whose role is to make sure that those are not enforced, but really upheld in a way that protects the community. I think we also have an ongoing conversation around how do you use technology. I know there are companies like Marigold, which I advise, which have done a really nice job on using natural language processing for monitoring, but still maintaining that human touch and engagement and moderation. So that's one of the things we're actively thinking about as well.
Mm-hmm. That's great. The community upholding the community is the best way. That's really neat. So we've got a lot of all stakeholders really listening: health plans, health systems, investors, startups. Let me ask you the question of the day, which is, how does all this stuff get paid for?
Yeah, I think that is something that we are actively working in. We're in conversations with payers, employers, always looking to talk to more about how to bring these solutions to bear. I think we are of the mind that that multimodal treatment needs a bundled approach to payment. I think it's really actually interesting in addiction in that you do actually have multimodal codes in the form of, IOP, intensive outpatient programs are often paid on a per diem code. So you're not billing per encounter, but you're billing for that 3-hour chunk at the rehab that may encompass 2 or 3 different types of care. And so we've actually got some decent models. And so thinking about how behavioral health companies and startups take advantage of that, it usually means having an NPI and setting up med PCs, and I can give another conversation or presentation on that. But the other thing I would say is, one of the reasons that, healthcare works the way it does is that we've standardized fee for service. And one thing we haven't done yet is standardize payment codes for digital health. And so, we've talked a lot about like, what does a standard code for a multimodal intervention that brings together licensed therapists, peer therapists, community, and content look like? As we start to see, with COVID, online care is here to stay. So how do we make sure that we're not just replicating, what we would call the operational debt of brick and mortar care when we do payer contracting for telehealth and digital models?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we've talked about that a little bit before, and I think that would be absolutely game changing, more standardization on the digital health side. So in terms of measurement, how do you think about measurement for these kinds of digital models?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting question. I think, when we look at it at Tempest, we look at not only clinical outcomes, which are primarily self-report. You can start using things like lab data, testing data, especially for substances, but we also think about engagement data. And so all of the passive data that we're able to collect on email opens, video watches, community posts, attendance, to really start to form a picture of what the dosage that someone's getting of these programs is. And then I think, going back to the sense that all of these companies at the end of the day need to be consumer companies in an increasingly consumer-driven marketplace, one of the things that we've been talking about for a long time is the need to measure kind of functional or impact outcomes. So even just asking consumers on a regular basis, why are you here? Why are you doing this? What are your goals? And then helping consumers track their own progress against their goals, whether it's to stop drinking, which it is for the case of a lot of people in our program who, many of whom achieve that goal, or whether it's folks who are here for more of a harm reduction or just general health improvement outcome.
Mm-hmm. Yep. You've mentioned something earlier about, post-COVID world, not going back. Can you talk more about how COVID has impacted things and, how it's driven it even to some extent?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. We had more people engaged in our platform in the month of April than we'd had in, the years that Hip Sobriety and Tempest had been serving patients. So I think like everybody else, we've seen, X number of increase in traction on the platform. I think we've also seen really high engagement rates, especially in the community piece, which has been really interesting. I think, 99% of the people who are in our 4-week sort of recovery at home COVID response program, so of those few hundred people, I think 99% of them were active on Facebook. So we've seen sort of a real uptick across our platform, across our paid products. We've also seen huge oversubscription of the support groups and things that we've been offering for free. And then I think it's been really interesting on the payer side where, all of a sudden virtual rehab, which was a crazy idea, 3 months ago, is here to stay. And there's been a lot of activity there. So, I think, and then there's also been all the loosening of regulations. So I'm not sure all of the regulation loosening is going to stay. I think there'll probably be a move back, especially around some of the state issues. But I think the acceptance of telehealth as a viable modality is really important. I also think there's going to be a lot of movement towards nobody's going to be just a brick and mortar provider. I think you're going to see a lot of hybrid models, and then a lot of models like ours that are digital first. But ironically, we were in the process of setting up in real life meetup groups, and had doubled our number of in real life meetup groups from 10 to 20 prior to COVID, and now they're all back online. But I do think this hybridization of offering things online, but then also having to meet people where they are is going to continue.
Yes, I love that. Meeting people where they are. And it really does sound like everything you've developed, your team at Tempest, is addressing consumers' tastes in a way that's more approachable for alcohol use disorder. So super interesting. As always, I need like a few more hours with you. So much great information. We're at time, but excited for others to connect with you at the conference. Thank you so much, Julia, for joining us. This was wonderful.
Yeah, thank you so much, Salome. Looking forward to talking more with you and others.